Hey there, berries, welcome to my patch 10.21 support tier list. Hope you're all doing well. We've got a few changes into support in this patch, but overall the patches at the moment aren't going to be too crazy until season 11. I think most of these changes are geared more towards high ELO players as well, so probably from like Plat or even Diamond 2 plus. That's kind of how they separate, like when they do some changes, they have like separate brackets where they they choose where and what ELOs to hit as well. And from the patch notes themselves, it seems like they want to hit high ranked gameplay, so they're hitting a lot of the junglers and they're hitting a couple of supports and buffs and nerfs, so we'll go through them. In this tier list, you're probably going to see a few champions that I haven't had on before. They include Set, Pantheon, and Trundle. They're champions that have probably been played a little bit recently. Trundle, probably the exception on that case. Trundle was more popular back probably in the season 4 or 5 days, I think, maybe a little bit later than that. Trundle was a pick that was pretty useful against tanks with his ultimate, and he just recently received a buff, so it might be something worth exploring. Trundle, in fact, is pretty, it has some quirky things you can do as well with the pillar. You can interrupt a few of the dashes as well in the bot lane, and also assist pretty nicely for ganks as well. So we'll talk about that once we hit the Trundle pick a little bit later on. Let's just dive right into it, into the tier 5. Tier 5 rarely ever gets changed, but I felt like it was enough at this point to shove the Veigar now into tier 5. I don't think anyone's playing Veigar support anymore. I don't think he's probably, in that good state at all to even be played right now. It was something that I personally, had some fun playing, particularly in the last season, but in this season he doesn't seem to be showing up at all. Moving swiftly on into the tier 4, I've added the Set and the Pantheon. Pantheon actually receiving a support nerf for this patch. They reduced a little bit of his damage in the earlier stages of the game. So Pantheon support actually got nerfed, and Set has remained unchanged, but I feel like he is still worthy of tier 4, probably not tier 5, probably worthy of tier 4. Both of these champions, you might have seen in Worlds recently. There's been a couple of situations where they could work quite nicely in terms of for very, very specific team compositions. And in solo queue specifically, this is what this tier list is about. Pantheon can do well if you're with a duo partner with a burst DD carry on the bot side of the map. Set as well, kind of the same sort of theme as well, but if there's more tanks, or if there's like a volley bear or an Ornn on the top lane, then, or in the jungle, you can use the Set ultimate to, for example, interrupt the Ornn ultimate and throw him back into their team, and since they have a lot of high health, you can get some decent damage in that way. But generally speaking, champions that probably don't get seen too much, and honestly in my opinion I didn't feel like are particularly good in solo queue at the moment, so don't really advise, along with most of the other tier 4 champions. I mean, if you are coming into the support role, as I always say, if you are coming into the support role from a different role, say from mid, jungle, top lane, I think you can probably play any of the tier 4 champions just to get to grips with, the support items and how the lane works overall. So it can give you a good starting position there, but you're always looking to move on to something a little bit higher up in the tier list. Moving on to tier 3. Got a couple of changes in the tier 3. We have moved Nautilus down from tier 2 to tier 3. We've also buffed Karma and Swain from tier 4 into tier 3. We have also introduced Trundle into the tier 3 potential option there. And from that, I don't think anything else has changed. So, I mean, there's quite a few changes moving into the tier 3 bracket. So this is like the middle of the tier. Some of these champions are going to be good if you're pretty good at them. Or if they fit like a very specific niche in a team composition. Otherwise, unless you one trick something here, then I don't really advise you to play in every single game in solo queue. Every single game is more looking into the tier 2 plus. So Nautilus I've moved down from tier 2 to tier 3. I feel like he's kind of fun to play in some cases in terms of the engage, but I think in the solo queue role itself, he does feel a little bit meh. I did put him up to tier 2 in the previous patch, but I think that was a mistake. I put him back into tier 3 now, kind of on the same lines of Thresh. Nautilus's win rate, I believe, is under 50% as well at the moment, so yeah, not looking too great. And talking about under 50% win rates, Karma was also seeing about a 47% win ratio in solo queue right now, and she did receive a buff which is going to affect her early laning phase. So it's going to affect her early lane phase a little bit, but the biggest changes are probably going to be coming into mid and late game. So every time she lands a ability on an enemy, it's going to reduce the cooldowns of your other abilities much more, your other basic abilities that is. The ulti cooldown got flat reduced, but won't be as affected as much by the passive. So overall I think it's kind of like a neutral change onto the ultimate. But with the new changes from mid game onwards, like level 6 onwards, you should start seeing your QWE coming off cooldown much more frequently for you to use. And one of my biggest gripes was with Karma is that she was good in laning phase, but she had absolutely no scale coming out of that. So I think they've come up with a good solution here in order to make Karma viable in those later stages of the game. So expect to be able to use your QWE a little bit more often, as long as you land those abilities, particularly your Q, and also every single tick of your W as well will also count towards your passive. So if you can get an up and close or use it on an assassin that's going into the backline, your W that is, you're going to find that your E and your Q are going to be coming off cooldown much quicker. We have Trundle as well. I've introduced now, as we've introduced, the set and the Pantheon. I thought, why not? Trundle's also getting a buff this patch as well. With the popularity of tanks in the top lane at the moment, particularly due to Worlds, I think Trundle is actually a viable option now with his ultimate. So if you're not familiar with Trundle's ultimate, he steals the stats of a single target. So for example, if you're playing against an Ornn top, if you're playing Trundle, that Ornn that has all of those resistances, well, they're now yours. And also you'll effectively be able to kill those tanks a lot quicker. Also, another fun thing as well with Trundle is his Pella is really troll. He can do a lot of interrupts for a couple of the more popular junglers at the moment, such as like Nunu. You can interrupt the Nunu. Snowball coming down quite nicely. You can also do a few things like interrupting like Tristana jump and Lucian. Anything that has a dash you can interrupt with the pillar. Also, like if you're up against a Thresh, if he's like a Q hooking in, if you pillar at the right time, you can make it so that it interrupts the Thresh following in. So there's a few like little tricks that you can do with the Trundle pillar. I'm sure there's more that I haven't mentioned. You could probably, if you're quick enough, you can probably use it to interrupt the Yuumi attachment as well. There's probably a lot of quirky things that you can do, like interrupting, Rakan's dashes. There's a lot of dashes that go on, and Trundle can, if you time it properly, you can get a good interrupt off. So if there's a tank on the enemy team and maybe a dash in the bot lane, Trundle actually might be a pretty nice pick to think about now. Swain, I can't remember if I mentioned that one earlier. I did push that up from tier 4 to tier 3. I feel like he is okay. He's still not like old Swain in my opinion. The movement speed here is pretty bad, but if you can get around that, then his damage in lane is always really good, especially paired up with some other form of burst AD carry. And particularly if you're up against squishies as well, you can be a pretty effective bully in the lane. It will require you to be snowballing in that lane quite a decent amount though, so don't slack. You're gonna have to keep engaging, but if you manage to pull it off, then you can set yourself up really nice into that mid game with your team, and you can be effectively like a semi frontline. So I wouldn't say that you could be like the whole frontline, but you can definitely be like a secondary tank equivalent to like a Leona or like a Nautilus, or a, wouldn't about to say Thresh, but I'll probably say that Swain's actually more tanky than Thresh. So you can definitely be on that kind of secondary tank role if your team needs that. Everything else here is, been here for a little while. The Gragas I would mention again. I actually had a couple of games with Yamato Cannon, if you guys are aware of him. He is an analyst at Worlds. And one of the things when I asked him is there any champions that you would like to see at Worlds that you haven't seen yet? And the first thing he said was Gragas Support. And it kind of made me chuckle a bit inside, because 2 weeks ago in this first patch, I was thinking like Gragas Support could actually start popping up here. But unfortunately, he hasn't been played at Worlds yet. Maybe we'll see him still at quarterfinals, etc. But I thought it was really funny that both of us had that Gragas Support thing in mind. So it's one to keep your eye on. I think there is potential there, especially like if you have a Yasuo in that team. I think it's like the really nice combination that you can do with a Yasuo player. But just in general, the champion is surprisingly tanky and does a lot of damage, particularly in the early stages of the game. So one to keep your eye on if you're thinking about playing something a little off the meta. I think everything there is nothing really else to add. I think Senna support is on the weaker end for now. A bit disappointed at Riot's balance team in regarding to Senna at the moment, because she's getting more popular still as AD carry Senna as opposed to support, and that wasn't how it was meant to be. But you know, maybe in season 11 they'll look to do more things with Senna support maybe. But I'm overall a little bit disappointed of how Senna has turned out to be since the release, and I feel like some more love could be given into her in a support, more kind of a support role, but we'll have to wait and see. Let's move over to tier 2. Speed it on. Tier 2, no real particular any changes there. I think the Brom buff that happened last patch was amazing. I feel like I was right about Brom being tier 2. He's really strong in the laning phase at the moment. Lucian isn't really played in bot lane anymore. Like, he's been played more in mid. But, you know, if you ever do have a Lucian in the bot lane with a Brom, you're basically winning that lane. But, you know, he works well with other AD carries that can also apply the Brom passive stacks efficiently. Like Ezra Qs also stack it up. You've got a whole wide array of different AD carry champions that Brom can work with. Also, you got to factor in as well his wall. If you're up against an Ornn, for example, you can block the Ram. If you're up against the Xayah, you can do a really good job of blocking the feathers. Just, you know, he's just like the Janna of tanks, really. Does a really good job, and you have that slight engage with the whole Q passive mechanic. Everyone else there is, you know, pretty standard. Lux and Zyra AP are, you know, decent options if you need that on your team. You know, Lux Caitlyn can work really nicely. Zyra Jin's a really strong combination as well. But generally those AP champions can work with the majority of AD carries as long as they don't need babysitting too much in lane like a Vayne or a Kog'Maw. Blitzcrank, you know, the bane of everyone, you know, is a pretty popular pick, particularly in gold minus. I think even in the high elo, he can be a pretty dangerous pick. You know, as long as you know what the enemy team are taking, you don't really want to be picking a Blitzcrank into like a Sivir or an Ezreal, really ideally. And you got the couple of enchanters there as well with the Sona and the Nami. They're okay. They're okay right now. But I think there's some better enchanters in tier 1, and I think we should have a little look at them. So moving up to tier 1, you know, we haven't really changed much as I said at the start. Tier 1 is exactly the same as the previous tier list. Bard is still, you know, if you're really good at roaming and mechanics, Bard is the go-to if you want to have a lot of impact on your game, particularly if you're playing with like an Ezreal or an AD carry that can kind of handle themselves, then Bard's always a really decent pick. I think Janna's win rate is actually, I think at the moment, the highest out of all the supports at the moment. Just her disengage, you know, it's not exactly as exotic of a playstyle as like Bard, for example, but she can make the enemy outplay themselves quite often and can drag out that laning phase enough for the AD carry to be getting their like first item, and then the AD carry do more of the work. Lulu as well is a really strong pick. She's getting played a little bit now at Worlds with a couple of AD carries. I think she's like the only enchanter at the moment being played at Worlds. I might be wrong at that. There might have been one Janna game, but at least it's the most popular pick, Lulu, enchanter-wise at Worlds. in both like the support and solo lane role. So she's doing pretty well right now. I think she's generally a pretty strong champion, particularly if you're playing with like a hyper carry, like a Twitch or a Cogmore, something really strong like that. But she generally does well with most AD carries, or if you need a polymorph for a specific target, like a Cassidin, that can also become pretty strong. Leona, in my opinion, is the strongest tank at the moment still. Nothing really else changing elsewhere on tank wise this patch. So I think Leona has the cleanest engage and on the lowest cooldown as well, makes it really easy to re-engage later on if you mess up the first time. And the Soraka. So I think if you are enjoying Soraka, I think you should try and play her as much as possible before season 11. My spider senses are tingling. Yes, I'm Spider-Man. The Soraka is going to get affected by Grievous Wounds next season for sure. It's becoming cheaper and more effective, so Grievous Wounds on champions is going to be much easier to purchase. So if you like healing, then enjoy it while it potentially lasts, as Soraka next season might be a bit more of an iffy pick. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that tier list. I went through it as quickly as possible this time, as there really wasn't much to talk about, and I don't imagine in the next couple of tier lists either there should be too many changes, but I'll keep you all up to date every patch. And if you like the tier list, don't forget to subscribe, check out the Twitch stream, twitch.tv/Bizzleberry, and follow there, and stay very awesome. Take care.